What if I told you that you weren't allowed to drive anymore? I bet you'd be pretty upset, taking a basic right away that you've been doing for years. Well, something very similar happened back in 1920 when political activist groups took control and lobbied against the consumption of alcohol. The Prohibition era, lasting from 1920 to 1933, impacted the U.S. in many ways. The main questions to be answered are who benefited from it, who didn't, and what could have been done differently. Alcohol, which dates back to 7000 BCE in China, started with a beverage made of fermented rice, grapes, millet, and honey. Soon after its creation, alcoholic drinks spread like wildfire and became staple for most cultures. These cultures put their own twist on different drinks and created the wide variety that we know and love today. The beneficiaries of the Prohibition movement consisted of a few religious groups such as Christians and Mormons, wives, and children. The Christians of the time strongly spoke out against alcohol, as they believed it to be evil and caused even the most righteous of men to give in to temptation or commit heinous crimes. The women, particularly the wives of this era, fought for prohibition in efforts to minimize domestic violence. This also benefited the children, who would now be less likely to grow up in abusive homes. From the ruin of families to crime in the streets, political groups such as the Women's Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League emerged. The Anti-Saloon League was founded in Ohio in 1893 as a state organization, but gained its national prominence in 1895. Their main goals, other than limiting domestic violence, were to prevent crime, solve social issues, reduce taxes, and improve health and hygiene. Gaining most of their support from evangelical Protestant churches, they lobbied at every level of government to discontinue the manufacturing and distribution of alcoholic beverages. After years of protesting, the 18th Amendment was passed in 1919. The amendment marked the beginning of the Prohibition era, banning all alcoholic beverages. However, this did not stop the consumption of alcohol in the U.S. Cities, especially those with a larger population, refused to enforce this new law, making the efforts of the anti-tolerance committees and Congress practically worthless. Some factors of this new way of life, such as the high taxation on alcohol, made it harder to obtain. This was an effective strategy that limited the consumption of alcohol. Despite the efforts of many, the 18th Amendment was repealed in 1933. Though this was a massive loss for the members of the Anti-Saloon League, it was ultimately the right decision for the U.S. The restrictions of the substance has been frequently used for centuries, and at the end of the day, it's unconstitutional. Though the idea of prohibition is against what the Founding Fathers intended, there can still be ways to limit the consumption of alcohol, and it can be done in a way that is constitutional. Currently, there's a higher taxation on alcohol. This tax, the alcohol excise tax, is determined by the gallon. The tax percentage depends on the amount of alcohol that is in each beverage. Thus, liquor has a higher percentage than wine, and wine has a higher percentage than beer. It also depends on the location and the seller of the alcohol. In conclusion, the Prohibition movement was unconstitutional and ineffective. The intentions of preventing crime and domestic violence were noble goals, but ultimately in vain due to the general mindset of the public. The larger cities where crime rates were the most prominent barely enforced the law, resulting in the idea that prohibition was inconsequential. However, through efforts such as taxes on alcohol, the consumption of the substances has gone way down. Someday, through other prevention measures, we as a country can have a healthier relationship with alcohol. Thank you.